here back to talk about some transverse plane core stability. This exercise can be used with really any level of individual. It's all going to depend on the acute variables and the amplitude of the amount of motion that you have go through here. So lower loads, slower tempo, great for a stabilization style of resistance training exercise. Once we start to get up into the moderate load, moderate tempo, with a slightly greater range of motion, more of a strength level exercise, but if we get into that explosive, powerful type movement with a greater range of motion, more of a power or athletic style of exercise. We're going to go through 3 different stances for this push-pull. I'm using some resistance tubing coming from low to high, and I'm actually using a pneumatic cable system here from Kaiser coming from high to low. You can use cable systems, pneumatic systems, or tubing. You want to make sure that they don't line up directly across. They want to be slightly staggered, so there's kind of space in between. If not, you end up with this little pull or drag across the forearm of the tubing or the cables. For the video, I've got to kind of get that just to get in the shot here. So the first position I'm going to look at is going to be a split stance. Now my front leg is going to be opposite of the pulling arm. I'm getting that posterior oblique subsystem to work. I'm getting that contralateral lat and contralateral hip to work together. I'm going to add in a small range of motion split squat as I push with one side and pull with the other. So this lat and this glute working tremendously to produce force. Now on the opposite side, my right shoulder and my left shoulder and my right anterior hip, the anterior oblique subsystem is doing just the same. And if you think about the gait cycle or running, the opposite hip and opposite shoulder function together to take that energy, that stored energy, and use it kind of like a sling or a spring to propel us forward. Now if I want to go ahead and change this stance, I can have the front leg opposite of the pushing arm. It's going to get a slightly different challenge through the body. I get a little bit more hip extension from this side here. You're going to notice that the hip that is opposite of the pulling arm is going to be working most often on that back side, that glute, part of the posterior oblique subsystem. During this whole time, my core has to stay engaged to prevent this unwanted transverse plane movement. Most people are pretty weak in the transverse plane, but here we can teach our body to minimize movement at that lower lumbar spine and at the sacroiliac joint where most people aren't very stable. The last position, which I find to be the most challenging, is just a traditional squat. I have a shorter base of support, meaning width-wise, so it's tougher on my core. And by this time, my left glute is going to be pretty smoked from going through this. You want to make sure that you switch sides as you go through. You can use an exercise like this, as I mentioned, as part of a warm-up for a higher level individual, as part of the meat of the workout for someone who's intermediate to beginner. You can use this as a core stability exercise. You can use it as a resistance training exercise, part of a circuit. It's a fun way to train. You're in a, I hate to say the F word, right? A functional position. You're upright, you're burning calories, but if you're working in a small group, you can engage someone visually, auditorily, kinesthetically, you can get around to them. So if you're looking for a core exercise, try this, experiment with yourself, change your stance, load different parts of the body, think about the fascial network within the body, the fascial connections that we have. If you want to get into the slings that Myers talks about in the anatomy trains, that fits too. If you want to go into the good old-fashioned shoulder hip, that's fine. You know, somewhere around the late 90s to early 2000s, we started talking about the posterior oblique subsystem, the anterior oblique subsystem. So it's all there for you. It's just the words that you want to use around it. But I hope this has been helpful for you, and it's a great way to prevent unwanted transverse plane movement throughout the core.